I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 135 of EO Radio Show. This is the 24th in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registrations of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. Previous episodes have covered 43 states and the District of Columbia. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Idaho and Iowa. After today's episodes, the only remaining states are Kansas, Missouri, Montana, and Nebraska. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there's a playlist just for the state filing requirements. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As we discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entities. Others include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be registered and regulated and subjected to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. This is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of the laws, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, we aren't going to dive deep into the pros and cons for where to incorporate, but instead we are focusing on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar matters. As with all the states we have discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Idaho or Iowa, or solicit contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit corporation's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in those two states. For the details of these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular, charities that are tax exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, he worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Welcome back to the show, Joe. It's great to see you again.
It's good to see you again, too.
So let's start with updates on state laws before we dive into Iowa and Idaho.
For sure. So Delaware, which is we always talk about, is a very big state for registering. As a refresher, while Delaware annual reports do need to have their directors named in it when they're filed on March 1st, they're not public. They're just something that they keep in the background. But going forward into 2026, there will now be a nature of business as well on these annual reports, which will have a drop down with 17 different choices and or an option to add your own, which you can add for 60 characters worth. This is something, much of what we're doing here, we would just characterize it as generically nonprofit. So it's not necessarily a big deal. But if we have clients that also have regular businesses, they need to think about this. The 17 choices, that's very similar to what you see when you register with the IRS, when you do your SS4. It has like a checkbox of a bunch of different ones, or you can add something of your own. So I want to say that that's what Delaware is mirroring this on. And then also for your place of business, obviously, very few businesses actually have a place of business in Delaware. Before, you could put the registered agent used in Delaware as that address on these back reports, but now you cannot unless you are your agent and you have an office in Delaware. Now you have to have your own separate office there. So just a little bit, again, it's not public, so it doesn't really matter what address you're putting per se. It could be one of your director's home offices even, or it could be, some other office that you're having. So it doesn't have to be Delaware tied, but it cannot be a registered agent there any longer.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be a Delaware address, but it has to be a real address. I know we've talked in previous episodes about the states that are actually checking to make sure it's not a P.O. box. Any indication of whether Delaware is going to check that?
Delaware has never allowed you to use a P.O. box for that address. It always has had to be a street address. The difference is now that you cannot use your Delaware registered agent as that address. That's the big takeaway from that side of it.
Okay. Well, I think more to come in other states on this different approach to finding out where people actually are. So stay tuned for future episodes on that. But anyway, let's go on to our regularly scheduled program and start with Iowa. How do we form a new nonprofit in Iowa or register our foreign corporation there?
For sure. So in Iowa, their Secretary of State governs your entity formations. And for the domestic nonprofit, while they don't have a form, their forms page that they have online has a link to Section 504.202 of the Iowa Revised Nonprofit Corporation Act. And that lays out exactly what your articles must contain. And then from there, you would draft it, much like we do both our Delaware certificates of incorporation and how we recommend you do your California articles as well. So it's something that's actually very common to what we would say. And it would contain your normal items, your name, your registered agent, the name and address of an incorporator, whether it will have members, if it was formed after January 2025, provisions regarding distribution of assets on dissolution. In other words, where we would put our standard 501c3 dissolution language. They say it may include a purpose, but it's not necessary. Again, this goes back to on an IRS side, obviously you would like to have that in there. This would be something, that the IRS is going to look at. It may have the names and addresses of the initial directors, but that's not mandated. There are a lot more maybe provisos, including that attend to the liability of the directors and their indemnification. So as always, when you do this, we recommend look at the Act section linked in the show notes below for the full language options. And again, this is something where we would probably recommend talking to a local Iowa council to see what exactly you want to put in terms of these provisos. And then the incorporator named in the articles must be the signatory.
All right. So that sounds like it's pretty easy in practice. Yeah. Once you've done one, it sounds like a very formulaic.
I would hazard to say it's not going to be much different than what you would, again, do if you were forming in Delaware or California.
Cool. All right. So our foreign organization already incorporated in, let's say, Delaware or California. How do we register that organization that's intends to be doing business in Iowa?
Yeah. For here, Iowa has a form application for certificate of authority nonprofit. It's a 2-page. It's very straightforward. Asks again for the basics that we see with a lot of these foreign registrations: the name, where it was formed, the date of formation, an address, your Iowa registered agent. Section 4 does ask if the corporation has perpetual existence in its home state, which is kind of unusual, but especially since most places we do use the perpetual as the default. Section 7 is a checkbox for the members or whether you have none. Section 8 asks for all the current officers and directors and their business addresses. And then a current home state certificate of status within 90 days of filing must be included with it.
Okay, so all of the directors then in office at the time you register in Iowa are going to be on this. And so we'll get to whether that's transparent or not in a little bit. But let's stay with the basics. Is this expensive for either the domestic or the foreign? And how long does it take them to get back to you with confirmation of filing?
Yeah, no. So actually, it's relatively inexpensive. It's $20 for the articles if you're of incorporation, and then $25 if you're doing the foreign certificate of authority. So that's very much on the low end of costs we've seen. The Iowa Secretary of State website does not note on their processing times, but online research noted that it's 2 to 3 weeks for the filing response if you mail it in, which you would do then, obviously, if you've created your own form. And while it's 1 day using their fast track filing service, again, that's not available for the corporations. They actually, if you go to their website and look through it, it has it marked which ones you can file with fast track and which you cannot. They do have an expedite of $50 for 2 business days and $15 for 5 business days. So again, that's still relatively cheap too. I mean, you're still talking $70 for a 2-day turnaround, which is, well, that's $70 is not too bad. That's what a California normal would cost you. So it's not too bad.
But you have to do it with sending in a paper form.
For a new corporation, for the foreign registration, you can use the fast track for that. Let me clarify that. I'm sorry, because it's a form that can pop and do in. But because of the nature of how the articles are done, this is something that has to be sent in. It cannot go through their online system.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about annual filings. Once we're formed or registered, what's the regular reporting look like?
So in Iowa, nonprofit biennial reports are due every odd-numbered year beginning January 1st and due by April 1st. So if we form now, it's September 12th, 2025. Our first report would then be due April 1st, 2027.
Okay.
And that would be irrespective of whether you were a foreign or domestic. And these are filed through their fast track filing system. So it's something that's an immediate. And here in Iowa for nonprofits, it's $0 for both of those. It's just file your report.
Okay, great. But definitely you need to calendar that.
Yeah. Biannual really gets away from you if you're not careful. That is correct.
So one thing that popped into my head a few minutes ago when you were talking about the foreign filing where we have to list the addresses of all the directors then in office. Is this public information? What are the transparency rules in Iowa?
No, their annual reports are, I would say that we talk about it. Delaware is really the exception where your annual reports then disappear into their system. Every other state, when you file an annual report, it is publicly available. So that would include here in Iowa. And yes, so on the annual reports, the officers and directors have to be named on these going forward, or do not need to be named, but we do need to name them in the foreign initial. So for a foreign, you've got it in your initial, but there's nothing in the back that obligates you to update that afterwards in your annual reports. And as we noted with the articles, you may put your initial officers and directors in it, but you don't have to for the domestic. And then that does not come up in the report. It's fairly opaque. Like I said, other than an initial foreign registration, you won't see those names in public.
Interesting. All right. So wrapping up Iowa, what other state agencies does Iowa expect the nonprofit to register with?
This is actually, there's not as much as we see in a lot of states. Charitable organizations that do not utilize the services of a professional fundraiser to raise funds are not required to register under the Iowa Code. The code section 13C2 requires, though, that professional fundraisers register with the Attorney General. And then further, 13C2(1)A requires that professional fundraisers disclose specifically the contributions received and payments made to client charities, what they call their professional fundraiser registration form, regardless of whether the funds are solicited. And then that disclosure is done at the time of their registration or by filing a statement. Additionally, charitable organizations are required to provide financial disclosure information to requesting parties within 5 days of a request. So that's under, again, 13C2(2). If either the professional fundraiser or the charitable organization fails to provide financial disclosure information when requested, then the Attorney General may seek an injunction prohibiting further fundraising until that disclosure is provided. You don't have to register, but you have to have, obviously, your ducks in a row. So if anyone asks you for it, you have it in the background.
Oh, that's interesting. So the state's not keeping it.
Right. The state is not keeping it unless you don't have it when someone requests it. Then the state becomes involved only then. While we're talking here specifically about registering your nonprofit, you and I do this. Charitable trusts do need to register, and we often do have charitable trusts that do this versus that. So it's kind of an interesting difference from what we see in most states, for sure.
That's an interesting comment to point out here. In these series, we're only talking about corporations, but many charities are formed as trusts. The vast majority are corporations, but many are trusts, and they'll need to look at these registration requirements as well. What about tax exemption in Iowa? Is our nonprofit automatically tax exempt?
So the Iowa does not automatically give you tax exemptions, but their Department of Revenue does govern this, and they have a great fact that's linked below along with all the other Iowa websites. Especially of note, the Iowa Secretary of State refers you to the Larned Waterman Iowa Nonprofit Resource Center for Iowa specifics. I went through it, and actually it is a great, excellent resource. It has a lot of links to how to do things there in Iowa, so it's a great source for that.
Oh, that's great to know. Okay, I like that. It seems like maybe not half the states, but a good number of them do have really solid resources available on the internet to help these new nonprofits get oriented and remain compliant in the respective states. Moving on now to Idaho. How do we incorporate in Idaho? What is the lay of the land there?
So yes, in Idaho, the Secretary of State governs the formations as well, their Secretary of State. Their on-site portal uses the same interface model as we've seen in California and in North Dakota. So if you're familiar with either of those states, you won't be surprised to see it or to realize you need to set up an account to navigate the forms and start really looking at things. Like California, here the forms are also available as online fillable and printable PDFs both. So although the Articles of Incorporation nonprofit online form is recommended by the state, if you wish to file articles that contain additional provisions not required in the state law, self-drafted articles delivered to the Secretary of State can be accepted by them. So that's kind of nice. It's like California. You've got an either-or option here. That being said, unlike what we saw in California and unlike when we saw in North Dakota, this one actually supports most of what we want to see in the articles. It's not where we see like gaps and things. Article 3 is the purpose and has a button that selects noting if it's education, fraternal, general nonprofit, an HOA, or a religious nonprofit. Article 4 is a voting members yes or no toggle. Article 5 is a, quote, asset distribution on dissolution, unquote, which has a button choice of members or to nonprofit with a similar purpose or a fillable for a specific. And this is where you drop your 501c3 dissolution language in. Then Article 6 specifically is a yes or no button if you will file as a 501c3. And then Article 10, you need to name the board of directors and their business addresses, and there need to be at least 3.
Interesting. I can imagine with the way this is set up, people might hit inconsistent responses.
They could. As always, when you're filling something online, at least at the end, it always has like a one last review of it. And I always recommend, and you've seen them before, I will like do a screenshot capture of that before we hit that final accept button. All of these is, since you have an account, they will save your draft, and the draft saves for between 30 and 60 days. I don't know. It's 60 days in California. I don't know how long it would save your draft here in Idaho, but you print it out, or just at least screenshot it, look at it again, make sure you've got your address set, you've got everybody's name set. Suddenly someone's suite is gone where it's just got the street address with no suite number attached to their business address. So little things like that. Always, we don't talk about it, but in the background, always proof it before you hit that final send. Save it, come back in an hour, and then do it. Hit the button once you feel confident again. So I think that would be that. And yes, this one is specifically, you've got to think about, yes, I am going to be a 501c3. That's kind of weird. Like, why would I say no? And yet if you're not careful, you'll overthink it and you will push the wrong button.
So switching to our nonprofit corporation looking to qualify to do business in Idaho, how do we do that?
For sure. So for a foreign nonprofit, they have a foreign registration statement nonprofit corporation. Fillable form is really straightforward. Name, your home state, your street address, your domestic principal office, a mailing address, the agent, and the governors. Governors is a strange term. I came up with this because I have a few LLCs up in Idaho before, so I looked at this. But under the Idaho Corporation Code 3021-10219, part of what for the corporation side, a governor is defined as a, quote, a director or trustee of a nonprofit corporation, unquote. So that's who the governor is in this. It's kind of weird. They use it as a generic term, though. That statute there under the Corporation Code has a list of about 15 different things that qualify as a governor, but this is the one that's specific to nonprofits here. Like I said, when I first started doing LLCs, it threw me off in Idaho. And now that I've gotten used to it, it's the same thing. It's something to think about. It's just different language, but they use it as more of a generic term across corporations, LLCs, LPs as the, I guess we would use a generic term like small g governing authority that they use as a capital G governor. And then you still need here a current home state certificate of status that's within 90 days of the filing to go with it.
So how quick are these filings turned around in Idaho?
The Idaho Secretary of State website notes that standard service filings are processed in the order received, and as of September 9th, their current processing time for standard service is 10 to 15 business days. So that's almost a month out when you think about business days. Expedited services filings are an additional $40 and are processed within 8 working hours of receipt. And then same-day service filings are an additional $100 and must be received by 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And then if they're after 1 p.m. that Mountain Standard Time, it'll be the next day.
So that's not a big cost to get a quick turnaround. What's the fees for these?
So the filing fee for the domestic articles there in Idaho is $30, and then the foreign registration is $100. It also says if you're filing a paper form, you incur an additional $20 manual processing fee. So again, it's how do you really push someone to use your online service? Charge them more if they don't use the online service, I guess is the.
Yep, that's right. Switching gears to annual filings. We've got our domestic and our foreign entities registered. When do we need to report back?
A nonprofit corporation must file an annual report with their Secretary of State annually by the last day of registration of their anniversary month. So if we incorporate or foreign qualify now in September 12th, 2025, our next annual report is due by September 30th, 2026. Reports may be filed during the month prior, so we could start August 1st, 2026. We have like a 2-month window essentially to file them there. Mm-hmm. And then all these annual reports must include the officer and director information, their names, and a business address. Just like we saw in Iowa before, here in Idaho, also they're $0 for both the foreign and domestic.
All right. Privacy. This caught my attention here that officer and director information is included. Is that made public?
Yes. Annual reports are publicly available on the There's a one step. We just talked about this. You have to have an account to form things. You also have to have an account to actually even do searches and look up entities. So there's a one step of like, you have to have an email address and you have to set it up. But then it's publicly available thereafter to anyone that wants to search once they set up an account.
Do other Idaho agencies want to know about our nonprofits? Where else do we register?
So even less than Iowa here, Idaho does not require charity to register before engaging in fundraising activities, nor does it require reporting on these activities to their attorney general.
There's no supervision
No, there's no supervision on that side. Exemption from the Idaho state income tax is automatic for nonprofits that have obtained their 501c3 exempt status from the IRS. And while nonprofits are not generally exempt from sales tax in Idaho, there are some exceptions that are granted. So go through the Idaho Tax Commission. They have a little exemption fact that you can look at. That link to that agency's on there, as well as all the document links that we've talked about here. Like I said, you can pull the PDFs of the forms, of the links specific to where you can pull those forms are on there. And here too, the Idaho Nonprofit Center has a good website overview. And so that's included in the links as well.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Joe. I think we've concisely covered Idaho and Iowa. Thanks for helping out and gathering all this detail and the wonderful show notes. I'm sure those will be helpful to many listeners.
For sure. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be on.
So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to resources in Idaho and Iowa and links to earlier episodes on the states we've already covered if you're interested in those. As a reminder, if you go back to the earlier episodes for states we covered in the past, be sure to check into updated laws or rules before looking at filing or even doing your annual report in any state. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun, and Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists, including this one that we're building where all the state filing episodes will be in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.